Thank you for joining me for this video. Let's have fun today in learning how to draw landscapes. One of the first things we're going to do is check out the supplies you might need. Then I'm going to show you how to use a viewfinder when looking for your composition. We're going to explore value distribution when using pencils. We're going to look at focal points in the composition. And we're going to look at a horizon line and how it makes a difference in what you're trying to portray in the composition. We're going to look at how to achieve distance and depth through the composition, maybe with aerial perspective, overlapping, placement on the page, and size differences. Next, we're going to look at composition and look at some ways to compose something that's interesting, put all the pieces together. And finally, we're going to look at creating thumbnail sketches. When it comes to supplies, the first thing you're going to need is paper. And you can draw on just about anything, any paper you have around the house, but I highly recommend going ahead and getting a sketchbook. And one that I really like is the Strathmore 400 series, that larger one, the brown one that's on the picture. But you can also get other ones. Maybe there's sale or something that you might find. I have a Canson Blick sketchbook in the middle, and then the blue one is by the Handbook Company, Journal Company. Those come in a variety of sizes, and they're super fun just to carry with you as you go around and doing some sketching. The next items on your supply list will be pencils, erasers, and a pencil sharpener, one that you can take with you and easily sharpen your pencils. I've listed quite a few of the pencils. We've got the 2B and 4B and 6B, and then I've got ones that have H in the title. When you see something that has a B, it means that that's the blackness. That's how dark. It's a softer lead. So we're going to look and say that a 2B is going to be a little harder than a 6B. So the higher the number, the softer the lead gets. And then when you have something that has an H in the title, that's just how hard the lead is. So you need kind of a variety of all those to get some effects in your drawings. I've also listed Sketch and Wash, which is a neat pencil. It's got a soft lead, and you can draw with it like a regular pencil, but once you add a little water to it, it will kind of melt and bleed like watercolor. So this may be something that you want to add to your collection of pencils. One of the first exercises that I want for you to do is to create a value scale. And I just use a single piece of paper to create a value card, but you could do this in your sketchbook if you want to. But mark off, maybe about 7 squares or sections, and start playing with your pencils. Start looking at the softest lead, working your way down to from the darkest to the very lightest. And you can see I tried to get kind of a variety here of values, from dark to medium dark and to the very, very lightest. And this kind of helps when you're looking at a composition and you want to see, is there a value distribution? Do you have some of those darks in your piece and some of the very lights in your piece? And is it working in the case of value distribution? One chart I always like to show my students is how you can, we see in color and how you convert color to value. So on the right side here, you're going to see some little chips of color, the oranges and reds and greens and blues. And I just converted that to black and white or grayscale. And it's interesting how the red and green, I would think that the red would pop out more, but yet the value is pretty similar. So one way that you can do that with landscapes, if you have a phone you can take pictures, your iPhone or something, take a quick snapshot and then convert that to the grayscale on your phone, and you'll be able to see how the colors relate to a value field. Let me show you what I did to make a viewfinder. I know you can purchase these already made, but it's kind of fun to make your own. So what I did was take 2 squares of white paper and I used a thicker paper. This is kind of a cardstock. I drew 2 L's. Already cut it out like that. Okay. Now you could take the 2 L's as is and just use tape to go back and forth and isolate, crop different areas of your image. But what I did was take and cut little slits here on both sides of one of the L's. I slipped this in here. I'm going to slip that one in there. So that means it kind of holds it for me. If I'm out somewhere and I'm looking at a scene and wanting to draw directly from what I see, I can go ahead and hold this up and kind of isolate areas however I want to. Now, when you are using your phone to take a picture or your camera, you're already doing this. You're kind of cropping out. You're creating a composition. But viewfinders are helpful if you're not using the camera, or if you have photographs and you print them out and you come home and you want to figure out, what am I going to do? And I'll show you an example here. This is an image. And I think I found that. I'm not sure if I printed that or I found it in a magazine. Anyway, I wanted to use that as an example. But let's say this is one big piece, a composition. But I might want to come in and do something different. Maybe I don't want all of that. Maybe I want to see a lot of the ground and very little sky and only one tree. Maybe I want to go like this and see very little ground and lots of clouds. I can kind of move it around and look at how I might want to crop this to make my drawing or my painting. So there's all this offers lots of opportunities and lots of options for you. And one thing you can do is, I made a small one, but obviously the longer you make the L on each side, the wider that you can pull it apart and make bigger crops. But for this one and for photographs, I went ahead and just made it a smaller one. So have fun making this. Let's play with the viewfinder just a little more and look at some composition, some compositions we can come up with from this one large image. And one thing is how you have your horizon line. Here, I'm just going to do this flat. How you have your horizon line. This is your horizon line right there. And if you'll notice in this image, they have more sky than they do ground. So if you look at this, it's like, it's almost divided into thirds. They're a third of the way up, and then there's 2/3 of the way up. You don't have that horizon line right in the middle. Let's see what happens if we change that and made a horizon line right in the middle. Well, you're cutting off some of the sky, that's for sure, but there is a certain amount of staticness. I think it kind of makes a drawing or a painting static to have something just right in the middle. It makes it a little more dynamic when you have a third divided into thirds. And that's kind of the rule of thirds, although I don't like to say rule, because you can, in drawing and painting, you can violate any of those rules if you can make it work. But that's just kind of a tip. Instead of having it right in the middle, which can be kind of static, you might want to have it like that, or we could have even done something to where there was more ground showing, like that. So part of it is also deciding, what do you want to be your focal point? And maybe I'm going to end up saying, wow, I really like having one tree balanced over on the left. And when I have that one tree there, I think compositionally it works, because my picture plane is kind of divided into thirds. And then I have something larger over on the left side, but that's balanced. It's a lighter color, but it's balanced by, or it's a lighter value. It's balanced by what the large dark area over here. So that looks pretty balanced to me. Okay, let's try if we, like over here, what if I took and decided I wanted to just make this tree right smack dab in the middle. Now, there can be so many ways that you do your composition depending on what your intent is for your drawing. If you are wanting to show that this tree is just balanced, I mean, it's like a bullseye composition. It's balanced right in the middle, and I pretty much got everything at my horizon line is pretty much in the middle. The bullseye of the tree is right there, and it has a real static quality. If that's what you want in your drawing, if you're wanting to emphasize the isolation of that tree just standing out in the middle by itself, then that may be what you want to do. But in general, I would say that might not be a good composition. You might want to move it one side or the other, like over here when I moved it over on the left side. It was a little off center. It helped kind of balance things. So these are just some ideas when you're looking at how to crop and how to start your drawing. I think next what we're going to do is show what this looks like in black and white. I'm going to show you some images of that so that you can see the grayscale, and we can kind of look at the value card and see how we're going to approach that with pencil. This is a black and white image or grayscale of the color photograph that we were looking at. And you can see that there's pretty much an equal distribution of the darks, the lights, and the medium values. And when you have this fairly even distribution, it helps guide your eye through a composition. That's why I kind of like to do the black and white or the grayscale. Here is just a grayscale of the small vignettes that I used with the viewfinder. But this is just a good way to kind of see how your composition is working. Let's practice thumbnail sketches. One thing that I like about doing thumbnail sketches in my sketchbook is that this is not a finished piece of art, and no one has to see this. I mean, they just don't, you know. It's like it's my own visual diary, and I can put in there whatever I want. And thumbnail sketches can be little tiny ones, little small ones, little vignettes that you might see. You might go in your sketchbook and draw rectangles or squares. They might be half pages. They could be a little bigger. So kind of whatever you want. I like them to be pretty small because I can lay down value or color really fast and decide where I want something to be placed. And on this one, I was looking at a scene, and I was trying to find shapes. So I saw clouds, shapes in the clouds. I started seeing some different values. So I was coming in. I'm going to start just kind of laying in some value. And remember the value card where I want to get some darks, mediums, and lights in there. And, you know, this is a little darker, I think, up here where the sky is. So it's looking for shapes, looking for value, and then just quickly trying to lay them down in a little small format, a little vignette, so to speak. And so I'm going to kind of look at this. I think that was darker back there around the trees. But I've got all my pencils, and maybe for a thumbnail, all you need is maybe a real like I've got my HB, which is a little not quite as, let's see. Yeah, this is really dark. So I could use different types of pencils, different softnesses, and then just try to vary with my pressure how I want the values to be laid in. But this is much easier, I think, if you're trying to make a composition, to do a bigger drawing or to do a painting. It's much easier to have just a thumbnail, and then you can kind of move things around as you see fit. So let's look at what creates depth on a flat surface. As an artist, you have a flat piece of paper, or if you're drawing or if you're painting, you have a flat canvas, and you're kind of like a magician because you have to create the illusion of depth. So when I look at these photographs, for instance, I'm looking and thinking, I know it looks like I'm going back into space. So why is that? One thing that you can look for is overlapping, and that's just something real simple. I know that this tree is in front of the mountain. I know that this tree is in front of that little tree, and it's in front of this little row of trees because it's overlapping them. You can also look at like this one too. Here's another image. It's like, those trees are definitely in front, and there's space that's developed there because they overlap. The other thing to look for is detail and like an aerial perspective. So if you can tell on this piece that those little blades of grass, I can actually see those. But as I go back into space, I don't see all the little blades of grass back there. The mountain becomes kind of foggy. It has kind of a smudgy look to it. I'm not seeing all the details of the mountain, whereas up in front, I can see details of grass. So that's something to look for. Another thing is placement on the page. If you place, the farther things are placed down on your paper or canvas, it's usually closer to you. If you place something farther up, it gets smaller, and that is farther away. So also let's look for, and I'm saying all of these things with a photograph, but when you're drawing, think about this. Let's say your fields of grass, or if I had a whole bank of clouds coming down, this is gonna get bigger in front, and as I move on up, those little plains of grass and fields get thinner. They get smaller. This tree is farther back than this one. It's smaller. These trees are smaller. And they keep getting farther and farther up on the page. And when you look at this tree, it looks like, oh my goodness, it's bigger than the mountain. But we know, just our brain is telling us that's not true. We know that mountain's a lot bigger, but because it's so far back, it looks like this is bigger, like the tree is in front of it and bigger. As you work with sky and ground, where the two meet, you will usually see that the clouds will get smaller and thinner. The ground will get smaller and thinner, narrower as it goes toward that horizon line. Okay? Another part of composition is thinking about the focal point. So I'm going to use the same image that I have here. And a focal point might be something that you want to draw. If you're painting or drawing a picture, you want somehow for the viewer's eye to be taken to that area. And there's different ways you can do that. Now, to start with, let's look at this. Sometimes you may be drawing something that is a pattern, that it's flat. I know the emphasis of this is for people to see the beautiful leaves. And so there's some kind of emphasis, but there's not, maybe not really a main character. All the leaves are pretty much the same size. But the contrast between that texture in the background and the drawn leaves creates some kind of emphasis on the leaves being important part. And so that may be the type of drawing you're doing. But if you're doing like a landscape or abstract, anything, you're going to look for, in my composition, what do I want the focal point to be? And in something like this, I would say maybe the focal point is this tree. I've got all these other elements in here, and what's funny is this line of dark trees is almost an implied line that takes me to this tree. I might look at, same thing over here. Maybe that tree, because of its size, because of its contrast with what's behind it and what's around it, that becomes my focal point. And another thing is just thinking about emphasis and thinking about, the main character. Who's the main character? Here's one, and sometimes you just have to look at this. Here's a composition, and I'm like, when you look at a picture, where does your eye go first? I mean, what's the first thing you notice? I'm kind of noticing this tree right here. So maybe that becomes my focal point. Maybe I want to crop it off like that. But once again, I've got implied lines of these fields going down to that tree, which kind of takes you to that area. In this drawing, this is a photograph, I'm really taken by this negative shape of the sky, but it almost creates an arrow down to this point. And in looking at this, I see that contrast between the dark rock or the dark tree right there, and then this lightness behind it. And I'm almost, this is a big tree, and that could be a focal point, but it kind of takes, your eye kind of goes right here. So here's another one. Let's look at these two. This is where if you're doing a landscape with a road, that's kind of like your implied line. Like, I know something's back there. I know, like, what would I want to put right there that kind of takes your eye right back there. That's the first thing that I notice, is this large road or pathway that goes back. And then with this one, it's kind of weird because the first thing I notice is the backlit trees, the autumn trees. At the same time, this is going in with perspective and taking me to this one central point, which is this little house right here. So just some things to think about when you're setting up your composition. So we're going to do an exercise to start with that is about aerial perspective. And aerial perspective is just where things are not as detailed in the foreground, or they're more detailed in the foreground, and they're not as detailed and kind of get fuzzy out, as it gets farther and farther away. I'm going to start off with a blank piece of paper, and then I just have some scrap paper. This just came from junk mail, but you could use any kind of paper. And I'm going to tear a jagged kind of line here. And I'm going to, I think, look for my softer pencil. I want something that will really smudge. Let's try this one. Or, let's go ahead and I think this is a 6B. So it's going to be pretty dark. But I'm going to take that line there and put it up high on the page, and I'm going to do is put this too. I'll do it this way. I'm just going to really lightly smudge that in. Fill that area in and just smudge it. I could take my finger and smudge it. That's going to be your background. It's going to be light, kind of light value, and it's not going to have detail, so we're going to smudge it. The other thing you can use is, I'm using a pencil. If you had charcoal or you have something that's, bigger than a pencil, you can do that. Okay, so I've got that. I'm going to do it this way. I don't like it that way. I keep flipping it back and forth. I'll just do it this way. So now I'm going to kind of do the next one a little bit wider, and I'm going to do it a little darker. And as I go down the page, I'll pull these papers apart more and more and more so that they are looking like they're more in the foreground. Okay, so we're talking about aerial perspective. This is one where I took the torn paper and I just, I used some graphite powder and I just smudged it on there with my finger. So, you know, you've got your larger shapes, darker, and then it progressively gets lighter as you go back. This is the one where I was using pencil, and I used some Sketch and Wash pencil because it's kind of cool how it will turn to a watercolor when you do this. And, you know, once again, I'm looking at things getting smaller, the fields getting thinner, and up front it's got more, you know, you can see blades of grass, it's darker, it has more detail, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So it looks like maybe it goes back into the distance. Okay, so try that exercise. That's kind of fun, just with scrap paper and either charcoal or soft pencil or graphite. Okay, learning some of the principles that I've been talking about with drawing a landscape. Let's practice drawing one, and I'm just going to do a small one. I think I'm going to just go up and look at this picture. I haven't converted that to grayscale, but I can still see values and lights and darks in this. And so what I did was just tape off. I know this is a square format, so I just taped off a square in my sketchbook. And I'm going to start out let's see here, find the right pencils. Here's an HB. What I'm starting out with is to go ahead and just kind of look at where these things are placed. The placement of the trees. I noticed that right there where the light is, you see that? As you go up, I'm gonna make sure I add that in there. And I'm gonna add it at a little angle so that it adds some interest. Sometimes that's in a composition, that's something that you can do. If something is just straight, it doesn't always have as much interest, but if it's got a little bit of an angle, it will give some more dynamic quality. So I'm just kind of outlining. And with this one, I like the idea that the mountain back here was, you know, you can see that it's got the atmospheric perspective to it because it's not quite as detailed, and up here it seems to be more detailed and the trees more detailed. So the first thing I'm going to do is have I outlined this. I'm going to come in and I think just try to lay in some value for that sky. I'm not using super dark. I'm not using lots of pressure, but do you notice the shape coming down here? I like that shape of the sky. So I'm going to make sure I have that shape in there. And what I'm going to do with this drawing is I will use my eraser to do some drawing also. Now, you see all the pencil marks in there? I'm going to take, this is like a blending stump that I can blend that. Try to get rid of some of that. Some of the little marks. If you don't have a blending stick, this is just like a rolled paper, you can buy them, but you know, use a Q-tip. A Q-tip can work too, but that kind of gives me something to go off of with a value to start with. Then I'm going to come in and I'm going to kind of work from the top down. And you notice how right now I'm not including that tree, like an artistic, you know, ability choices, I guess, that I can make, that I can slant that line a little bit. Maybe I don't want to add that little sprig of a tree over there that's in front. But I'm going to kind of look and say, I know right in here, I'm going to put some of my darks in here.
And the way I do it is I just kind of move across the page and try to find different shapes and areas that I might want to color in. You may not want to start off super, super dark. Start off with something light. You can always add to it. And if you'll notice that if I, like right in here, I'm seeing that some of those bushes and trees, probably, will have some light on them. So I'm going to take my kneaded eraser. This is an old one. I've had it for a long time. I can still use it though. I'll get an area and I can actually come in and start picking up what are some of the highlights on that bush. So as you start laying in values, just know that you can draw with your eraser also. So I'm going to work on this a little bit, and then I'll come back and I'll show you what I've got. I'd like to show you a little bit about textures in drawing a landscape. Some of the textures you can actually take your pencil and an eraser and create them, with the stroke of your pencil or how hard you press with your pencil. But there's another method, and it's taking something that will create a texture and doing a rubbing. Now, this is a thinner paper. What was in here was the thicker sketchbook paper. So you're kind of limited on what will show through as far as a texture. This was just a little bit thinner, and as you can tell, I've taken things that are maybe hard and put it underneath. Like that one is sandpaper. And I just took my pencil. I took the side of a pencil. You could use a graphite stick. When I do this, it gives me a rubbing that has a texture to it. This is like from like a fruit bag or something that you get at the grocery store, but it's a mesh. And if I do that, I can get a texture like that. And then this was a really inexpensive, I think a cutting board. One side it doesn't have much of a texture, and this side does. And so I was seeing what would happen if I did that. So those are some things that, you can try, some little methods you can try. On my paper, I was able to get the sandpaper and the netting and then the placemat. I was able to get that on there. A couple others I tried, it was just a little too thick for it. So what we're going to look at is how would you use textures, and one might be this. I'm going to show you a picture of rocks. So after you've seen that picture, the rocks have some kind of texture. And what I've tried to do here is create the value. I've gone in and done some rubbing. I really like the sandpaper underneath it. I've tried to do some drawing so that, rocks are not soft and curved. They're going to be harder and a little more angular. So here's my image. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, well, wow, all back here, except for right about there, is going to be really dark. Okay, so that's a dark value back in here. And the rock, the lightest part is the top part of that rock. And so the way to make that pop is not only leaving that light, but what I do behind it. And so that's going to end up being my darker, softer lead pencil that I'm going to work on that. As I go down here, I'm looking and thinking, I may come in. Here was like a little pothole, a little thing in the rock there. And so I started kind of thinking, well, how will I draw that? Didn't draw it just one black hole, but I drew it so that there was kind of a shadow. So it's kind of lighter on this side and then gets darker on that side. And I'm going to continue some different types of textures. Maybe I'll even start here. Let's see if I can get some textures with that. I'm going to say I think with textures I like it better on the thinner paper, but we'll go with this. And once I get something on here like this, you know, I can come in with my eraser. I can things away and maybe dab at it to get some kind of, like we're talking about, some texture. So it's not just flat. Okay, and then with the grasses, what I'm going to do is, I know those grasses, they're darker than the rock, but they are lighter than what's behind them. So I'm going to do some blades of grasses to where I maybe come in like this, in between the blades, so you can see some of those blades of grasses. Okay, so let me work on this a little bit, and I'll come back and show you how I finished up with this. So here I've done a little more drawing on the rock and trying to add some texture and trying to show rock formations. Now, composition-wise, I know we've talking about this, and I don't like this composition. If I were doing a thumbnail, I would have changed it. This is kind of like that bullseye I was talking about. It's right in the middle. But for the purposes of showing value contrast and maybe some textures in your drawing, I think this works fine. What I did, you can see where I did the rubbings. I came in and used my eraser. I tried to find places where the edges were real important. So, you know, right up next to this rock, it was a super dark area, and that needed to be really emphasized. Down here, just doing some scribbles can create texture. I'm going to show you a picture, a Van Gogh drawing, that he used scribbles to create value and to create textures, and we're going to practice that. So this is how this drawing turned out. Now we'll kind of move on to some scribbles that we can look at.
These images are by Van Gogh, and it's interesting to me how he used line to create texture and value in his drawings.
So first of all, I want you to do kind of a little example sheet of various textures and patterns that you can make with your pencil, because we're going to end up using this in drawing a photograph from a landscape that I just showed you, and kind of think about some of the marks that Van Gogh was making. You know, we've got some of these little marks. We've got, gosh, maybe it's going to be marks like this. Maybe you're going to come in with this kind of mark using the side of your pencil. Maybe you're going to use something, let's see here, like I did there. Maybe your marks are this kind of texture. I think about if you're drawing a tree that you don't want to draw, maybe it's a bush and you don't want to draw every single little leaf, but you know, you can kind of start looking at different shapes of leaves, and this can kind of be a pattern maybe that's in a bush, and then you come in and do some shading in it. So in general, I just want you to practice. Find out what the different types of pencils will do, and how you can come in and maybe even make patterns, make textures. I even think this is real fun, to press real light, and then you press, light, press. That can give you a different flow of a line. So practice some of these, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to show you how I have attempted that photograph that is of a landscape by using just marks and textures.
Here's the photograph that I decided to use with mark making and line and texture in my drawing.
Okay, let's take a look at how I'm starting to do this. I started using some of that technique where we put the sandpaper under it, and I did some rubbing under there. I kind of sketched in where my lines might go, and then I'm going to just try, this is just a fun exercise, but to try to make marks be my value. And I just know this won't turn out like a Van Gogh, but that's okay. It's just a fun exercise. I could even do back here if I wanted, I know I want that to be lighter than that. I could do some erasing. Darken the fields around it to make that road pop out a little bit. I could even do some things like cross-hatching, because I know that we've done that before. That's another line. Let's do a fine cross-hatching. I could use my light pencil, the harder lead, to do a fine cross-hatching that will give me a value without me having to smudge everything. And I'm not saying smudging, you know, using a smudge stick or Q-tip is bad. It's just another method. And so this is kind of fun to see if you can attack this with just lines and textures with all your different pencils. So I'm going to work on this a little bit and let you know the outcome. So here's my attempt at drawing the photo that I showed you, and I was using different types of leads, and I was coming in and maybe using the side to make some marks, to make some dark values, short marks, long marks, cross-hatching, anything I could to create a drawing that I wasn't smudging and I was just using texture. So try this exercise. I think you'll have fun. Here's a photograph I plan to use for an eraser drawing exercise. Okay, let's try one more exercise. This time I want you to create a ground on your paper. I kind of started doing it here. And by a ground, I mean that you're going to use either, you could use a graphite powder, you could use, turn it around here, a charcoal powder. You could take, if you just have the pencil, a real soft lead, the side of your pencil, and try to make a ground, like a, by ground I mean a value. So instead of a bright white paper, we're going to create something on here that already has kind of a medium value to it. And let's see, I think I'm going to try the charcoal. And then after I get this on here, I can come in with my eraser, and we're going to try some drawing, reverse drawing, by using an eraser to pull out some of the lights and then using the pencil to put in some of the darks. So let's see if I can try to get it on here as evenly as possible. Just smudge it in. And I'll show you, let's see, I could do this with the side of the pencil and then smear that with this smudge stick, Q-tip, or paper towel. There's just different ways of doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and get a ground made on here. And you don't want to get too dark. You just want to get kind of a medium ground. I'm going to do this and then I'll come back and show you what we're going to work on. Okay, I've got my ground on here, kind of a medium ground. And it's a medium value. And so I've pulled up this photo because I thought it would be fun to go backwards and remove things, do a reverse drawing. So what I did was, I don't know if you can see, I did come in and lay down a few lines just to kind of show where things are placed. And let's see, doing that. And then I love these aspen trees. I think what I'm going to do is mark a few of them and start erasing to see what I come up with. After I do some erasing, I can actually come in and then start adding to them with a darker pencil. I can start, I'm working from the middle, and I can go lighter, I can go darker. So let's see what happens if I come in with some of these lines. This is my good old trusty, let's see if this will erase. And if, this is a great one to use if you have a white eraser. This happens to be like the, let's see if I can find it. It's like this kind of eraser, the white eraser, but it's on the pencil. And so I could come in and start, I might get a better line like that. Okay, so I'm going to work on this just a little bit, get some of this removed, and then we'll come in and start adding some of the darks, some darker things on here. I will be right back. So let's take a look at how I'm progressing on this drawing. I enjoyed erasing. It's fun to do that, and then you start building from the lights. You have the lights that you've taken away, and you start adding to it with the darks. And I'm kind of looking. You can try the paper that you use, and if you use graphite or charcoal, some of it will come off a little easier. I use the powdered charcoal. I'm really seeing I want some whiter clouds in the sky. I can't quite get that off in the background, but you can see it's a little bit back there. But one thing I want to show you is that there was a light source. It looked like there was a light source coming from this direction, and so I did more lines, a dark line on the left side of the trees, and then on the right side it was mostly what was behind it touched it instead of me drawing a harsh line. I did a little bit, but I mostly did the negative space, like the lake behind it. I went through and I started shading that negative space. And by doing that, that is making the trees pop out a little more. I think I need to come in and probably do some more erasing. One thing that when you're doing this, your hands can get in the way. I don't know if you can see my hand is just black, and so I started using some kind of paper towel, something to put my hand on, because you'll end up smudging everything. But all in all, this is a fun project, so I want you to try this, where you put a medium ground on it, erase to take away, and then add pencil to add to it, and you can get your value scale that way. Well, let's take a look at what we've covered in this video. We've learned about aerial perspective, how things get lighter and fuzzier in the background as they go back in space. We learned about using a viewfinder and cropping, value distribution in our pieces, and how to create textures. If you're drawing certain aspects, rocks, whatever. And we learned about mark making, different types of marks that you can make. We learned about having a main character and how you can have implied lines or contrast, whatever you need with
being able to create a main character or an emphasis in your piece. We also did an eraser drawing. So these are just some things that are fun exercises. I encourage you to keep practicing, and I hope you have lots of fun.